Sarah Jenkins fumbled with her keys, exhaustion weighing heavily on her shoulders after the long flight home. 2 weeks of back-to-back meetings in Chicago had drained her, and all she wanted was to collapse on her couch and enjoy the tranquility of her beloved Oakwood Estates home. But that tranquility shattered the moment she spotted the bright red paper taped to her front door, fluttering slightly in the autumn breeze. Notice of violation. Read the bold heading. Sarah tore it from the door, eyes widening as she scanned the meticulously typed list of infractions. Her garden gnome collection, a cherished gift from her late grandmother, apparently violated the aesthetic cohesion clause of the HOA guidelines. The rose bushes she planted just before her trip were deemed non-conforming vegetation. A $150 fine had already been assessed, with additional daily penalties accruing until remediation. The signature at the bottom made Sarah's stomach tighten. Karen Wilkerson, HOA president. Sarah had watched from the periphery as Karen campaigned for the position 3 months ago on a platform of neighborhood excellence and preserving property values. What had seemed like harmless community enthusiasm then now felt oppressive. "This has to be a mistake," Sarah muttered, stepping back to survey her modest front yard. The 7 small gnomes were tucked discreetly among her plants, barely visible from the street. The rose bushes, standard varieties recommended by the local nursery, complemented the neighborhood's existing landscaping perfectly. Moreover, she'd specifically shown her garden plans to the previous board president, who had given verbal approval. Sarah had even documented the conversation in an email afterward, thanking him for his time. As she stood contemplating her next move, movement across the street caught her eye. Karen Wilkerson, clipboard clutched against her chest, was methodically photographing the Thompsons' mailbox. Even from this distance, Sarah could see the pinched disapproval on Karen's face as she made notes. When Karen turned and spotted Sarah, she offered a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Welcome back," she called, voice carrying across the quiet street. "I trust you'll address those violations promptly. The board is conducting a comprehensive neighborhood audit." Sarah raised her hand in a half-hearted wave, the violation notice crumpled in her other fist. She watched as Karen moved to the next house, her measured stride reflecting the power she clearly relished. Inside, Sarah dumped her suitcase in the hallway and went straight to her home office. The email confirming her garden plans was still there, buried under 2 weeks of unread messages. But would it matter? Something told her that Karen Wilkerson wasn't particularly interested in precedent, only in her own vision of perfection. The Oakwood Estates Community Center hummed with the low murmur of conversation as homeowners filed in for the monthly HOA meeting. Sarah arrived early, clutching a folder containing her email evidence and photographs of similar garden decorations throughout the neighborhood. She had rehearsed her points carefully, reasonable, fact-based, and conciliatory. Karen sat at the center of the board table, her posture impeccable, a stack of papers arranged with geometric precision before her. She tapped her gavel precisely at 7:00 p.m., silencing the room. Item 1. Violations and compliance. Karen announced after dispensing with preliminary matters. We've made significant progress in addressing aesthetic inconsistencies throughout Oakwood Estates. When the floor opened for homeowner comments, Sarah raised her hand. Karen's gaze slid past her repeatedly until a board member quietly pointed in Sarah's direction. "Regarding the violation notice I received," Sarah began, rising from her seat, "I have documentation showing that my garden design was approved by the previous." "If I may interrupt," Karen cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice through Sarah's words. "Ms. Jenkins provides us with a perfect example of the challenges this board faces. A PowerPoint slide flashed onto the wall. A photo of Sarah's front yard. The image zoomed in on her garden gnomes, their cheerful faces made to look garish and out of place. This is exactly the kind of declining standard that threatens our property values, Karen continued, using her laser pointer to circle each gnome. The bylaws clearly state that all lawn ornaments must be approved in writing. Verbal assurances from former board members are not binding. Several homeowners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one made eye contact with Sarah as she stood, folder half opened, her carefully prepared defense withering under Karen's presentation. "I'd like to finish me." Sarah tried again. "We need to move on," Karen interrupted. "There are 17 agenda items to cover tonight." After the meeting, Sarah found herself in the parking lot surrounded by neighbours who spoke in hushed tones. "She got us for our wind chimes," whispered Elena Rodriguez. "Our basketball hoop, 3,000 in fines already," added Michael Chen. "My bird feeder," said Diane Williams, an elderly widow. "It's been there for 12 years. By the end of the week, Sarah had organised an informal gathering at her home. 8 neighbours crowded around her dining room table, comparing violation notices and strategizing. Through her kitchen window, Sarah spotted a figure in the shadows across the street, Karen's husband Robert, his phone clearly raised to photograph her house. The next morning, a new violation notice awaited Sarah. Unauthorized commercial activity, $250 fine. The description claimed her home had been used for business purposes without proper permits. The temperature of the conflict had just risen dramatically. Sarah's dining room transformed into a command center over the following week. Her laptop sat open beside stacks of printouts, HOA bylaws, state property laws, and a growing spreadsheet documenting every violation reported by her neighbours. She had taken a week off work, telling her boss she needed to handle an unexpected property dispute. What had begun as personal indignation was evolving into something more methodical. "Look at this," Sarah told Elena Rodriguez as they pored over the community's founding documents. The bylaws specify that amendments require a 2/3 majority vote of all homeowners, not just the board. Karen's updated interpretation guidelines never went through that process. Sarah's spreadsheet revealed disturbing patterns. Of the 37 homeowners who had received violations, 29 had either opposed Karen's election or had close ties to those who did. Meanwhile, several board members' properties displayed infractions identical to those being penalized elsewhere. "This can't be legal," Michael Chen said, pointing to his computer screen. "State law requires uniform enforcement of HOA rules. They can't selectively target some homeowners while ignoring others who commit the same infractions." Sarah's research uncovered more. The HOA had specific appeal procedures that Karen had never mentioned in any violation notices. Daily fines couldn't legally begin until after the appeal window closed. Most importantly, the HOA was required to show how violations materially affected property values, something Karen had never bothered to document. "We have a case," Sarah concluded, rubbing her tired eyes after another late night of research. "But we need more evidence of selective enforcement." The next morning, Sarah drove methodically through Oakwood Estates at dawn, photographing every yard ornament, non-standard mailbox, and landscaping variation. She documented 7 garden gnomes at properties belonging to Karen's supporters, none with violation notices. When she returned home, a strange van was parked across from her house. A technician mounted something on Karen's roofline, a security camera angled directly towards Sarah's property. That afternoon, Sarah received an envelope containing $2,500 in accumulated fines and a notice that a lien would be placed on her home if not paid within 14 days. "This is harassment," Diane Williams said when Sarah called her. "My son is an attorney. He says you should document everything." Sarah created a timeline with photographs, screenshots of emails, and notes from conversations. She started a private online folder, sharing access with trusted neighbors. The evidence mounted daily, each piece a small brick in the foundation of their case. The question wasn't whether Karen was abusing her authority anymore. The question was what they could do about it. Sarah straightened her blazer as she entered the community center's small conference room. The formal mediation session, mandated by the HOA bylaws before legal action could commence, felt more like walking into a tribunal than a resolution meeting. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by 3 board members, their faces impassive. To Karen's right sat Gregory Palmer, supposedly a neutral mediator, but also Karen's next-door neighbor and frequent tennis partner. "Let's establish ground rules," Palmer began without preamble. "Each party will have 10 minutes to present their case. The board will then deliberate and propose a resolution." Sarah placed her meticulously organized binder on the table. "Before we begin, I'd like to confirm that this session is being recorded as required by Section 8.3 of our bylaws." A flicker of annoyance crossed Karen's face before she nodded to a board member who reluctantly set up a recording device. During her allotted time, Sarah methodically presented her evidence: the email approval from the previous board president, photographs of identical decorations permitted at other homes, the statutory requirements for uniform enforcement, and the proper notification procedures that had been ignored. Most significantly, Sarah concluded, sliding across copies of her spreadsheet, is this documentation showing that 78% of violations have been issued to homeowners who opposed the current leadership during elections, while similar conditions at supporters' homes remain uncited. Palmer glanced at the spreadsheet before pushing it aside. "Let's hear from the board." Karen's presentation was a masterclass in deflection. She spoke of community standards and fiduciary responsibility, while never addressing Sarah's specific points. When she displayed photos of Sarah's garden gnomes, they had been digitally darkened and the perspective altered to make them appear garish and oversized. Furthermore, Karen added, "Ms. Jenkins has been fostering division in our community, holding unauthorized meetings, and encouraging non-compliance among other residents." When Sarah attempted to respond, Palmer cut her off. "The presentation phase is complete." The board's deliberation consisted of whispered conversations, while Sarah sat in uncomfortable silence. After 15 minutes, Karen slid a document across the table. "Our proposed resolution," she announced. "You may keep your garden decorations if you, 1, pay all outstanding fines in full, 2, sign this acknowledgement of violations, and 3, make a public statement at the next community meeting expressing regret for your actions." Sarah read the document carefully, her heart sinking at the clause requiring her to cease all organization of community members regarding HOA matters. "This isn't mediation," Sarah said finally. "This is an attempt to silence legitimate concerns." Karen's smile tightened. "Then I'm afraid the fines stand, and further enforcement actions will proceed." Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at the failed mediation agreement. The ultimatum had clarified something for her. This wasn't just about garden gnomes anymore. It was about community governance and fairness. Fighting alone wasn't working. She needed to change her approach. That evening, she created Oakwood Neighbors for Fair Governance, a private online forum. She invited the initial group from her dining room meeting, asking each to invite 2 trustworthy neighbors. Within days, Membership grew to 34 homeowners, nearly a quarter of the community. "Knowledge is our best defense," Sarah wrote in the forum's welcome message. She uploaded simplified explanations of HOA laws, templates for documenting violations, and a calendar of upcoming board meetings. Attendance at the next monthly meeting doubled. When Karen attempted to rush through the financial report, a hand rose from the back of the room. "Excuse me," said Terence Washington, a retired accountant who had previously never attended meetings. "Could you explain the $15,000 expenditure for landscape enhancement that wasn't in the approved budget?" Karen's explanation about emergency beautification fell apart when Terence requested specific invoices. The following day, every home in Oakwood received a glossy newsletter announcing exciting improvements to the community entrance, coincidentally located directly across from Karen's property. 3 weeks later, when longtime board member David Sullivan questioned why other planned maintenance projects had been deferred, he found himself publicly chastised by Karen. He resigned that evening, followed by 2 other board members over the next month. Special election whispered through the community. According to the bylaws, 3 vacancies required a special election within 60 days. Sarah hadn't planned to run, but a delegation of neighbors appeared at her door one evening. "We need someone who understands the rules and will apply them fairly," Elena said. "And who can stand up to Karen," added Michael. 2 other respected residents agreed to run alongside Sarah, Terence Washington, and Amara Johnson, a paralegal with experience in property law. Their platform was simple: transparency, fairness, and community input. They campaigned door to door, listening more than talking. They heard stories of intimidation, confusion, and frustration, but also of love for the community and desire for reasonable solutions. Meanwhile, Karen grew increasingly erratic. The community Facebook page she controlled deleted comments asking about financial discrepancies. When questioned about missing meeting minutes at an informal gathering, she threatened to fine the homeowner for spreading misinformation. The night before the election, Sarah received an anonymous envelope containing printouts of her private emails with neighbors, emails that could only have been obtained through questionable means. The implied threat was clear, but it was too late. The coalition had already grown beyond her. Oakwood Estates was awakening. The community centre buzzed with unprecedented energy on election night. Homeowners who had never attended a meeting filled every chair, lined the walls, and spilled into the hallway. Sarah, Terence, and Amara sat together near the front, their campaign materials, simple 1-page summaries of their qualifications and vision, stacked neatly on a side table. Karen arrived flanked by her remaining board members and 3 new candidates she had hastily recruited. Her smile faltered momentarily at the sight of the crowd. "Before we begin voting," Karen announced after calling the meeting to order, "I must address some procedural concerns. According to my interpretation of the bylaws, only homeowners current on their HOA fees may vote tonight." She produced a list of 23 delinquent homeowners, most of whom had disputed their violation fines. A hand rose from the middle of the room. It belonged to James Miller, a quiet man who had lived in Oakwood for 15 years. "Point of order," he said, his voice steady. "I've asked the HOA attorney to join us tonight." A woman in a sharp suit stood near the door. "Lissa Chen, HOA Legal Counsel," she introduced herself. "I was contacted regarding several procedural questions. To clarify, pending disputes do not affect voting eligibility until formally adjudicated." Karen's face flushed. "I wasn't informed." "All homeowners are entitled to contact HOA counsel," Lisa replied calmly. Now, shall we proceed with the election according to the bylaws? The voting process was meticulous. When Karen's appointed election committee member attempted to disqualify several ballots for improper folding, Lisa stepped in again. Each vote was counted in full view of the assembly. The results weren't even close. Sarah, Terence, and Amara won by substantial margins, a clear mandate for change. In her first board meeting, Sarah proposed 3 initiatives: a bylaws revision committee with broad homeowner participation, a transparent violation appeals process, and quarterly financial reviews by an independent accountant. Additionally, Sarah added, "I move that all outstanding violation fines be suspended pending review under the new appeals process." The motion passed with Karen casting the sole dissenting vote. Spring arrived in Oakwood Estates with a new energy. The coalition had grown into a true community partnership. Homeowners voluntarily participated in a neighborhood cleanup day, clearing winter debris and planting flowers in common areas. Sarah's most daring proposal, a community garden in the previously neglected park, initially met resistance from Karen. But when the garden's design incorporated suggestions from all board members, including Karen's recommendation for a butterfly section, something shifted. 6 months after the contentious election, property values in Oakwood had increased by 8%, a fact noted in the quarterly newsletter. Violation notices decreased by 90%, replaced by a monthly community standards reminder focusing on education rather than punishment. On the garden's dedication day, Sarah was arranging refreshments when she noticed Karen hesitantly approaching with a potted plant. "Roses," Karen said stiffly. "They do well in this soil." It wasn't an apology, but as their hands briefly met in the transfer of the plant, Sarah recognized it as something perhaps more valuable, a beginning.